He spent more than 4 months in solitary confinement in a Miami prison simply for being at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Welcome to Freedom Alive. John Strand is an innocent American caught in the crossfire of political persecution and government weaponization. In June 2023, he was sentenced to 32 months in prison. But thanks to a U.S. Supreme Court decision, he was freed on July 24, 2024. John joins us on this episode to expose the brutal treatment he and other J6 prisoners have experienced. And his story certainly shines a light on the grotesque abuses of power by our government. I'm blessed to again be joined by Matt Staver, our co-host from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, John injured no one, threatened no one, caused no damage. And as we will see, he was respectful to the Capitol Police. He is, in fact, a patriot who became a political prisoner.
Yeah, you know, it's shocking because we talk about and we hear about political prisoners in foreign countries, people who are locked up in prison because they disagree with the ruling regime of that particular time in history. And yet we actually see this in the United States of America, and John Strand is one of those individuals. And the story that you're going to hear from him is just unbelievable about what happened to him while he was in prison. He wasn't treated in some high-level prison. He was really treated like a bad actor simply because of his political views.
Truly incredible story. We cannot wait to bring it to you, but our Freedom Alert is next.
Professor's freedom of speech is vindicated. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals recently ruled in favor of Dr. Alan Josephson, who had successfully led the University of Louisville's child psychiatry program. Yet Dr. Josephson was demoted and eventually fired after he publicly gave his views about gender confusion in children. Dr. Josephson appeared on a panel with a pediatrician and a professor of endocrinology in 2017. During the panel, the three questioned the idea of gender identity and the efficacy of administering cross-sex hormones to children. Dr. Josephson argued that children are not mature enough to make these permanent decisions and that 80 to 95% eventually accept their biological sex without such treatment. Now the professor's case will proceed to trial. Professors should not be punished for having different views than their colleagues or administrators.
Up next, Matt's interview with John Strand.
I'm pleased to welcome our special guest, John Strand, who has become a political prisoner. Fortunately, now as we interview him today, John is free. Welcome to Freedom Alive, John. I'm very interested in going through your amazing story.
Matt, thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor, and it is certainly a privilege to be free in the United States of America. It's a gift from God, and I'm excited about that, but thank you for having me on the program.
You wrote a book called Patriot Plea, and the subtitle of it is about being a political prisoner living in the divided states of America. And to set the background, you were indicted. You were sentenced for 32 months in prison in June of 2023. But thank God, on July 24, 2024, you were free because of the United States Supreme Court decision that found that the so-called Sarbanes-Oxley Act could not be used against J6 individuals who entered the Capitol. I want to talk more about that, but let's talk about January 6, 2021. You're in Washington, D.C., and describe for me what happened that day.
Well, that's a tough summary to deliver in such a short period of time. A lot of things happened on January 6th, and a lot of it has been represented and reported incredibly dishonestly to the American public and to the world. But the short answer is that on January 6th, about 1 million American citizens gathered at their nation's capital to exercise their First Amendment right to protest. For my case specifically, I actually was in Washington, D.C. that day as part of my professional obligation. I'm a creative director for a nonprofit organization called America's Frontline Doctors. So I was in D.C. in my professional capacity, working as an assistant to the president of the organization, who was scheduled weeks in advance to be one of many speakers, along with many Congress people, at a rally with a government-approved permit right on the grounds of the Capitol building itself. And that's why I was there.
So then that day unfolded, and then there was this situation with people going into the Capitol.
Right.
Tell us about how that happened, how you got in the Capitol, what it was like when you got inside.
So, again, for a very brief answer on how it happened, we've had several years now, of course, to investigate this. The government, the mainstream media, has not investigated it honestly or properly, but independent journalists and victims, such as myself, have done the best that we can. Congressman Clay Higgins, thankfully, has been very strong in championing the honest investigation. And these investigations have revealed there is a large amount of very easily proven substantive aspects to the government being involved in inciting violence and facilitating improper behavior such that they would create a false flag event. So there was a lot of government malfeasance involved in creating the chaos that ensued in the afternoon of January 6th. From my personal experience, when I was there, I was in a crowd expecting to be accompanying my colleague, who was a scheduled speaker, to a stage to deliver her speech. That got off track because, well, we actually don't know why. I think there are nefarious reasons for why that happened, but all we knew at the time was that it was confusing. There was not clear signage or direction on how to proceed. There was almost no law enforcement anywhere in sight on the east side of the Capitol, and there were thousands and thousands of people streaming in to attend a speech that we all expected to be participating in. And then at a certain key moment, there was a huge explosion. The crowd was terrified and panicked because they were under assault, and we were attacked by police officers, which I didn't realize or understand immediately at the time, but then realized that's what was happening. And by then I was embroiled in a large crowd that was panicked. I couldn't escape the crowd. And then doors in the Capitol were opened from the inside, which indicated to all of us that we were permitted to go inside because there was no other way to understand what was happening. And physically, the crowd forced us through those doors into the building. And that's how I came to be inside the Capitol when I had no plan or intention or even I had no imagination that that would happen.
So let me go back to that very important point. The doors of the Capitol building opened up from people that were already inside. They were not pushed open by a crowd trying to break into those Capitol doors, but they were open from somebody inside, and then the crowd went inside the Capitol building.
Correct.
So now you're inside the Capitol building, and what's it like there? Describe what you saw. Did you see Capitol Police there in the building? Were they trying to stop you? Were they trying to just be basically still? What did they do? What was their demeanor?
So there was a lot of confusion at that particular moment, especially, as you might imagine. The first thing I want to let people know is that rather than just taking my word for it, you should see it for yourself. So there is a 14-minute video, less than a quarter hour, very brief. It's called Do You Know What Happened on J6? It's right on my website, johnstrand.com. Mm-hmm. Please do yourself and your country a favor and make sure you watch that video start to finish and make sure you share it with every person you possibly can, because it completely destroys the false narrative of J6 and really highlights just how badly many innocent people have been destroyed by these lies. You can see on that video, first of all, it's clear that I'm trapped in a crowd. It's clear that the crowd is compressed and that there are police actions that are causing the crowd to become panicked. Then you can clearly see the doors open and someone almost hits myself and Dr. Gold, my colleague, over the head as we're basically pushed over the threshold. I catch her from falling and lead her directly ahead because there's people flooding in from behind me. So it would be like fighting against a waterfall or a tidal wave. It was physically impossible to escape out of the building. The only safe physical thing I could do was move forward. I did that calmly and held my colleague safely to get her out of the melee of that vortex at the door there. But then once I stumbled inside and picked her up and pushed her, led her forward, I immediately observed my surroundings to figure out who I expected nobody to be in the building. but there were many people in the building that were clearly there from other entrances besides the one I had just come through. So I was additionally confused, thinking, I guess they had allowed entry in other places and that people were supposed to be passing through the building, because there was no other way to understand what else was happening. There were police officers with weapons in their hands. They were very calm. I did not see anyone inside the building that was agitated. I did not see or hear any directives from law enforcement when I first entered. There were just people in front of me that were walking through velvet ropes in the main public areas. So we proceeded because we literally didn't know what else to do or where else to go. We knew we couldn't escape in the East Columbus doors through which we had entered, again, because of that melee and the compression of people coming through. So then the video, that 14-minute video, shows every step I took in the entire building, all captured on the government's own cameras. So you can see everything I did the entire time I was inside the building, and you can judge for yourself.
That's incredible, because I know you weren't violent. Dr. Gold that you were with was not violent.
No.
You were inside for just a short period of time. There were no attempts by the police that I'm aware of to throw you out. There was no resistance by you. You exited the Capitol, and then sometime later you found out that you're now indicted for criminal violations for entering the Capitol. You and Dr. Gold both were indicted. Tell us how you felt when you got that indictment, and then I want to walk through what happened after you were not only indicted, but sentenced to 32 months and then your time in prison.
So the first step was the indictment. After J6 happened, remember, we were there on the ground. We experienced it in real time. So we're very accustomed to the mainstream news media being very dishonest, being just lying straight up, and also just being hyperbolic. So the consternation of the country immediately following J6 didn't match up with our real life experience being there. So we understood that it got chaotic, and they might prosecute a few people for breaking windows. I saw one broken window. That's all I saw. I did not see any assaults personally witnessing them myself. So we did not understand what this was going to become. It was 12 days after the event on Martin Luther King Day, January 18 of 2021, when I was at home in Los Angeles, working on a conference call on a Monday morning in the living room of the home that Dr. Gold and I worked at, when our lives were shattered forever. And we were brutally assaulted by a military-style invasion that was something straight out of a Jason Bourne action film. But we were on the terror end of it. They pulverized our door with a battering ram, literally, and rushed in with over a dozen agents armed with assault rifles and red laser sights bobbing on your chest.
Wow.
You realize if I flinch the wrong way, I'm going to be dead. It was absolutely terrifying, traumatic. It was abhorrent. It was absolutely a Nazi jackboot style intimidation tactic that our American FBI routinely uses against MAGA supporters, against conservative Americans. This type of tactic is not used against people on the political left, despite the political left protest activity often being much more violent and dangerous than anything that happened on January 6th. So the assault was horrific. It really was horrific.
John, your story is just amazing. And for those that are hearing it for the first time, I'm sure they're shocked. I've heard some similar stories like this where the FBI just early in the morning, for no reason at all, barges in with weapons drawn for somebody that they never even had a risk. There was no potential flight risk. There was no violent risk at all, but they treat you like you're some violent terrorist or so. This is happening in our country. Now, you were indicted. You did not plea, so you went to a trial. They wanted you to plead to some other kind of lesser offense, I would imagine, so that you would get some kind of time in prison, but not as much. You chose not to plea. You chose to actually go for a full defense. Why did you choose to do that?
Thank you for asking that question. It's the reason I titled the book Patriot Plea. It's very important for people to understand this. I knew 3 years ago when this insanity began that I was going to be convicted by a rigged judicial system, by a rigged and weaponized and frankly completely evil DOJ. I knew their intent was fraudulent. I knew their intent was destructive. I knew they were going to convict me and put me in prison. And I chose to go to trial anyway on principle, because the entire case against me and January 6ers at large is, as I said, a fraud. It is one of the most wicked, fraudulent events in modern American history. And I promise you that's true. And the specific details in my case are absolutely shocking, because I was charged with a 20-year felony. Now, before we even get to what the felony is, just think about the fact that it is attached to 20 years of potential prison.
Yeah.
That essentially wipes out most of your prime of your life. That is a life-destroying prison threat, along with $500,000 of fines. But then the DOJ gave me a golden parachute plea deal of one single misdemeanor. So I could have had the entire J6 insanity completely behind me years ago with a single misdemeanor, slap on the wrist. That's nothing. But instead, I chose to take on a 20-year felony and go to prison. Why did I do that? A couple of reasons. Number one, first and foremost, I am a Christian. I believe that Jesus Christ is the Savior of the world, and that his teaching, his word, is the only hope that every one of us has, not only in this life, but in what is to come, which is far more important. And so I firmly believe that as a Christian, I must hold to a standard of honesty and integrity. So to take the plea deal would have been to legally and formally, before the country, swear to a lie.
Yeah.
I will never swear to a lie. They could have threatened me with the death penalty, and I still would have declined that plea deal, because I will not bear false witness in public. I will not bear false witness in that context. I will not swear to a lie, ever. But number two, not only was it a lie, but that plea deal for myself and all the January 6ers, and this is where it gets very, very evil. They constructed these plea deals using that 20-year felony, which the Supreme Court just vindicated me and all J6ers by saying that was used fraudulently. But this is years ago when they first started and there was no pushback.
Right.
They used this 20-year felony to scare people to death so that they would take plea deals, even though many of these people knew they were completely innocent. Many of these people knew signing the plea deal, which is not just saying I'm guilty of a trespass, it's saying I agree with the government's statement of fact, the government's statement of offense. And if you read that statement of offense, I detail all of this in my book, Patriot Plea. That statement of offense was absolutely fraudulent and very specific. They crafted a narrative so that when hundreds of people instantly took the plea deal and signed it, and what choice did they have? They'd go to prison for 20 years, right? So they signed it, and then the DOJ held up that kill sheet of hundreds of January 6 defendants and told the country, look, they all admitted to it. They all said they were guilty. They all said they knew in advance they had a criminal state of mind. They all said in advance they had a predetermined plan to take over the government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of the insurrection, attack against the Capitol, preventing the peaceful transfer of power, all of these bombastic statements, they're all completely lies. They're all completely fraudulent. It's ridiculous on its face, but they threatened you with 20 years of prison to make you sign it. And, of course, many people did. And that is how they pushed the lie down the throats of the American people.
And what you're talking about is the so-called Sarbanes-Oxley Act. It was a law that was modified because of the Enron Corporation scandal, where they tried to hide their financial corruption. And so it deals with financial corporate fraud and documents, not anything to do with J6. But they use this because it has a 20-year sentence. And consequently, if you then raise that, as you say, 20 years is what you're going to get if you go to trial. But you know what? We'll put that to the side and we'll give you something very light. It's still criminal, misdemeanor. And if you plead to that, you agree to our terms, then you can get off on a shorter note. That is obviously a scam. It's a shame. I am glad that the Supreme Court overturned it, and that's why you're out of prison rather than this 32-month prison sentence. You got out about a year later from prison. Now, while you're in prison, I mean, it's outrageous what's happened so far. But it even gets worse when you get put in prison. Tell us about your treatment in prison, because you were confined to solitary confinement, right?
That's right. So as you said, it only got far worse from there. And Matt, I just want to plead with your listeners, with anyone hearing the sound of my voice right now. I really beg that you would understand, or try to understand, because you can't really understand if you're not there, and I was. But I can tell you it is an absolute hell on earth. They are tormenting these J6 hostages. They are psychologically abusing and torturing them. I was tortured because, and I use that word intentionally, Amnesty International considers anything longer than 14 consecutive days of isolation to be a form of torture. I was held in horrific solitary confinement conditions for 4 straight months.
Oh, my goodness.
And all I can tell you is that is a miracle only by the grace of God and Jesus, my faith in Jesus, that kept me alive and that kept my mind strong, because even I was being broken down in those last few weeks. It was, I can hardly explain to you how terrible it is, and it could kill many other people. It is not anything to be trifled with, and it is egregious what is being done against human beings, but it is especially egregious that it is our own government that is weaponizing and abusing their power. This is absolute tyranny, as the founding fathers warned against and loathed, which is why they separated from England. They didn't want to separate from England at first, but the tyranny was so detestable that they felt morally obligated before God to establish liberty in America and build a constitution to protect our unalienable rights. And these are being violated right now by our own federal government. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, all of these are being completely trampled with zero accountability right now as we speak across the country, but especially J6 hostages are being crushed. And it is a miracle that I'm out of prison right now, because I could have been there for the entire 3 years, and I don't even know how I would have survived all of that.
Well, in fact, some of these people, they were charged just like you with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and they were threatened that they'll be put in prison for 20 years. And so instead of that, they did a plea deal that you were asked to do. And so they moved the Sarbanes-Oxley Act off the table, and now they're in prison for pleading to something other than the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And so now the government says, well, we're going to continue to keep those people in prison because they didn't plead to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. They plead to something different, but they did it because the government threatened 20 years in prison, and they wanted to do something to at least not go to prison for 20 years and plead to something that they didn't do. That is the shameful thing. Tell us about, I mean, I can't even imagine solitary confinement for 14 days, let alone for 4 months. I mean, in something like that, you're not having any association with anybody, right? You can't see outside. You're totally confined by yourself for 4 solid months, day and night.
The only way I could describe it is, imagine that you're on a submarine, which is already a confined environment. It's a lot of metal. It's intimidating. And then you inadvertently trip in a hallway and you fall into a closet and the door closes behind you, and you jump up to open the door and realize it locked from the outside, and you shake it and you can't get out, and you bang on the door and no one listens. And then suddenly you feel the room shake and you realize the submarine is sinking, and then boom, you feel the submarine hit the bottom, and you keep banging on that door screaming for help, and no one ever answers you. That's what I experienced.
So I would imagine that this particular solitary confinement obviously has 3 concrete walls, for example, right? Or 3 solid walls? 4? And so the door that you come in is also solid, maybe a peephole? I don't know.
Solid steel.
Solid steel.
Yep,
so when you're inside this thing, you literally are inside a closed closet and not able to see the sun. You're not able to see people. You're not able to see anything except the 4 walls of this small room.
That's right. There's a 6-inch square plate glass peephole through that steel door. And there's typically some sliver that they say is a window, but you can really not see anything out of it. So you're essentially in a concrete closet in a bunker.
That's unbelievable. I can't even imagine. I mean, It's hard to even describe that, and I can imagine it's traumatic for you even going through and thinking about that again. John, thank you for telling your story. It's very powerful, and I hope that it continues to resonate in not only informing people, but causing real change in this country, because this is a great nation, but it's only great if we continue to fight for freedom, and if we allow this kind of weaponization of the government to continue. This is not the America that we all know and that we want to have for ourselves and for our future posterity. So thank you for standing up. Thank you for your courage. You can go to johnstrand.com, johnstrand.com, and I encourage you to read the book Patriot Plea and also watch the video. John, thank you for joining us on Freedom Alive.
Absolutely, Matt. The future is only what we fight to make it.
Thank you. God bless.
Matt, so many emotions well up inside you as you watch John share his story. I felt heartbreak. I felt this gut-wrenching anger and my blood boiling. It's detestable. And when you consider what happened to him and so many others, and in his particular case, which is plainly evident, he really did nothing other than just simply be there.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I thank John for taking time out of his schedule. He was able to actually do that interview during an airport where he was traveling. So it all worked out well for us to be able to have that compelling story. But you're right, all these emotions are just different emotions that you feel. You feel a betrayal of what happened. Our government shouldn't be doing this. I mean, this is a third world country kind of thing. Our government shouldn't be persecuting people because of their political beliefs, but that's a fact what happened to him. The only way to change that is we need people in office that understand the role of government, that respect the rule of law, that fear God, frankly. And we need those people who are responsible for this to be held accountable. Those people ought to be put in prison.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's easy to see that as we move forward, not just this year, but every election, really, the rest of our lives, it matters. They are big, big deals. And it's also apparent, very obvious, that we must trust God. We have to trust God. We have to pray for our country, for our leaders, that He will come against evil. And so much to consider as we look ahead. In closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. Join us here next time. You'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.